Now for a look at the economy and how it affects central bank independence, we're joined by Saruhan Hatipoglu. He's Chief Executive of Berry and CCTV's Global Economics Analyst. Welcome back to the show.
Hi, Rachelle.
So let's start with your reaction to US jobs data. Obviously, a key factor for the Federal Reserve when it comes to whether or not it adjusts interest rates. So what were the bright spots for you and what were the causes for concern?
Well, the bright spots were definitely the wage gains. There was 2.6% increase this time. This is back to back now, which is good news because that was one of the main concerns about inflation not being there in the U.S. economy. And when you look at the industry gains, you would see professional and business services making the most prominent gains, which is great because that's where the wages are actually, or the hourly pay is higher. So that kind of is related to that. But what I was happy about seeing flat employment situation in oil, gas, and usually oil and gas companies because they have been contracting quite a bit. So that stopped, which is great news. I was also happy, and not many people agree with this, but I was happy that the unemployment rate ticked up a little bit. Because,
and why is that?
Because if it went down to 4.67, I think the Federal Reserve would be more aggressive in increasing interest rates, and that would really have an impact on the economic outlook. What I was concerned about, not so bright spots, of course, underemployment is still there, close to 10%. And we're seeing people who are just stuck in their part-time jobs. They're just not able to get to that full-time level. And the job gains were kind of low this time, 156,000. It was 232 June through August, average of 232. And the first 8 months was 182,000. So that was low and not the brightest spot in my opinion.
Now, speaking of being stuck, we know that the Fed is kind of hedging its bets at the moment, not really pulling the trigger on raising interest rates, especially as we have the election coming up. Now, as we heard in Owen's report, Donald Trump accusing the Fed, saying it's too political, obviously the Fed denying that. Does he have a point?
Well, no, he's playing politics there. His point is playing politics. But should there be concern about what happened with the Federal Reserve decisions? Sure. I've been here 6, 7 times in the past appearances, and I've criticized their decision not to raise rates. But that's an intellectual debate. These are independent economists sitting there and making decisions about the economy. They really don't care who the next president is going to be or what they're going to think about their interest rate increases. So I don't think that it was ever political, and it's not political now, and I don't think it will be political in the future.
Now, that being said, it's obviously the president who does pick the head of the Fed among their board of governors. So what's your take on whether central banks should be independent? Are there perhaps any benefits to having a central bank that does have some political sway?
Well, if the idea here is, what I'm hearing from the critics of the Federal Reserve is, well, we should have more authority. We should have more say on these decisions. But they do come, the federal chairman do come to the Congress. They can ask all the questions they want to these individuals, and that's their involvement, and that's where it should end. Because I don't know if you watch these things, I do from time to time, and the level of not knowing what they're talking about, I'm going to be very blunt here, is so obvious that I would be very afraid if some of these members were in the Federal Reserve Committee making decisions about an interest rate increase or decrease. And also, I want to say this too, if you get this politics into the Federal Reserve, then they will have lower interest rates, which means that Treasury then can issue cheap debt out there. So we don't want that. That creates moral hazard.
Now, with that being said, central banks have taken on a far more significant role when it comes to economic management, especially since the global financial crisis. Now, some countries, some citizens are still waiting to see the gains from those policies. So some people are saying there's a crisis of confidence when it comes to central banks. Are they being overly pessimistic, or do you agree?
Well, I do agree that the economic growth has not been to the satisfaction of the average people, or people in general, in this country as well as in developed countries here. But I think the blame goes to not monetary officials here. I think it goes to our neighbors that live 2 miles south of us here in this Congress building that haven't done anything for the past 8 years, that haven't passed any stimulus measures, fiscal stimulus measures in the past 8 years. Now, for them to complain that the Federal Reserve is not doing a job to jumpstart the economy, I think is unfair to the Federal Reserve.
So a lot of finger pointing there. Hopefully, we'll see if that benefits anyone at the end of the day. Thank you so much for joining us. Saruhan Hatipoglu, our CCTV Global Economics Analyst.